Welcome to the Kick Sugar Coach podcast. Join me each week as I interview experts who will share the science of sugar, sugar addiction, and different approaches to recovery. We hope to empower you with the information and inspiration, insights, and strategies you need to break up with sugar and fall in love with healthy whole foods so you can prevent and reverse chronic disease, lose weight, boost your mood and energy. Feel free to go to my website for details on my coaching programs and to access free resources, kicksugarcoach.com. Hello and welcome to the Kick Sugar Coach podcast. I have with me today my friend and colleague, Netta Gorman.
Hi.
And let me tell you just a little bit about her. She is a fellow Canadian and she is a teacher, a college instructor. She teaches ESL in a college out of Quebec. And what's interesting is that Netta is also on the sugar flour-free path, but she has a very unique approach to it. And she has a very unique sort of niche in this space because, as we know, people fall along the sugar addiction spectrum. Some of us are hardcore, the 10 out of 10, the 11 out of 10. That's me, right? And that's typically the clients that I work with. But Netta is lower on the addiction spectrum and maybe not even on it. She was just one of those, you know how they say there's users, there's sugar users, sugar abusers, and sugar harmful users, and there's sugar addicts. Netta was a sugar user. She was over consuming sugar and she didn't even realize that it was tying to her extra weight, her achy joints, her sluggish digestion, her cravings. And the last thing she wanted to do was cut sugar, but she did it. And she's just celebrating her 7th year. Almost 7 years of being sugar flour free, although flour was a little bit bumpier. So welcome, Netta.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention is that Netta is working on a book, so that will come out. But she's also got a podcast that just reached 100,000 downloads. And so it's a wonderful place to also, hear more, another perspective on what it means when we break up with sugar. So Netta, tell us a little bit about your journey with sugar. Take us back to your childhood. Did you eat a lot of it? Was it a part of your family food culture?
Well, I didn't think it was a lot because I think my definition of a lot has changed over the years. So I just thought we ate normally. We ate healthy foods. My mum didn't necessarily enjoy cooking. And I say my mum because my parents were divorced, so my dad wasn't really there much. But so she was mostly responsible for the cooking. She has never made it a secret that she never really enjoyed cooking. Plus, she was a full-time working mom. You can't really enjoy it when you're strapped for time anyway. But she did really try hard to make us proper meals, home-cooked meals. You can hear I grew up in England. My family's British. And so I don't consider that we ate a lot of sugar, but I mean, it was just normal to have dessert after a meal. And it was normal to eat cereal, which now I know is just disguised sugar, for breakfast, and toast for breakfast. And that was all normal. And I would use my pocket money to go and buy chocolates and sweets at, the corner store. We have another name for it in England, but, at the off license. And so it was all normal. We didn't, we never a birthday went by without cake. And never a special occasion went by without some sort of dessert or pie or whatever. And that was just my life. And sugar wasn't a problem and chocolate wasn't a problem. It wasn't a problem. I didn't have a weight problem. I put on pounds, of course, when I had a baby later in life, but I wasn't overweight. And so I didn't have visually, if you will, I didn't have any sort of problem with my health, because we usually think that if you're overweight, you have a health problem, and if you're slim, then you're just fine. But I wasn't just fine. I had and still have mental health issues in my family and for myself. We struggled with infertility issues for years, and had to have in vitro for our daughter. I also struggled with digestive issues and chronic constipation all through my 30s and into my 40s. and always had like backache and aches and pains. And for me, that was also normal. Now my definition of normal has also changed. So I actually, once I was at the point of my chronic constipation where I was only really going to the bathroom once a week, that is when I thought the physical pain that I was in and the bloating and the discomfort was such that I was just desperate. I said to myself, I can't live like this anymore. And to make a long story short, it was suggested to me by a nutritional therapist to try for a period of 2 weeks, cutting sugar, sweeteners, flour, as well as taking hydrochloric acid pills because I wasn't making enough stomach acid and digestive enzymes. That's a lot of stuff to do. And I said, no, I'm not doing all that. No, are you crazy? So I was I resisted it for the longest time until I realized that things weren't getting better and my resistance wasn't helping. And then I tried it for 2 weeks. That I think you can pretty much do anything for 2 weeks. So that was the beginning of the rest of my life. I was 45.
And I love that story. And how we have to be desperate enough and ready, our back against the wall and the wall on fire, right? To go, okay, I'm willing to consider, not eating these processed foods that I've eaten my whole life all day long, and maybe a few supplements. So I love the part. Tell us about the part how you finally decided, okay, I'll do this for 2 weeks. I'll just eat this stupid whole food meal plan that this naturopathic nutritionist has given me. And what happened in the early days
of that 2 weeks? Yeah. So, well, first of all, before I said, okay, I'll try it, I was no way. And then eating all the things. And like, this was during the summer of 2015. And I would have like double ice cream and double, cappuccino with the cream stuff on it. And noticing that, of course, things weren't getting better. They were getting worse. And I actually ended up reading Grain Brain. And so that was it wasn't even about sugars as such. It was more about grains. And I thought, oh, that was the first inkling I had that maybe things that I'd always been told were not true or not biologically accurate, as I like to say now. And I thought, and I'm the sort of person who likes to question things. And I'm a teacher at college, and I like to make my students question things. So this was a great way. No one had told me to read it necessarily. I stumbled across it. This was a great first contact with, oh, wait, maybe what we consider to be healthy foods are not actually healthy for me. And then that sort of started this domino effect of me thinking, well, if that's not necessarily accurate, then maybe eating more fiber that the doctors had always told me to do for my constipation, maybe that's not accurate either. And then I thought, well, if that may not be accurate, then I might as well try the craziest thing, which is no sugar, no flour, no sweeteners. Might as well. Who knows? So it was this sort of adventurous spirit, I think, and curiosity and open-mindedness that saved the day for me. And then I decided, okay, just before the new semester, the new school year started, I'll give it a go. And it was, I think, in August it was in July 2015. And I gave it a go. I got this list of whole foods, and I thought, what am I supposed to do with these? And I spent like 2 hours in the grocery store, sort of willing the labels to be whole foods, and of course they weren't. I put everything back on the shelf and stick to the outside of the grocery store and meats and fish, because I'm not vegetarian, nor will I ever be, I think. So I didn't have the plant-based proteins, but I had the meat, the animal-based proteins, the fruit, the vegetables, and not much fruit anyway, because I was told, keep the sweet-tasting foods to an absolute minimum, just to see, whether the sky will fall on your head, and then all the flour-based products, bread and crackers and cereal and, additives, that it was like, my God, they're everywhere. But actually, they're not everywhere. They're just everywhere in packaged foods. That was the big takeaway for me.
The part that I remember about your story that I love, and I've quoted it many times, including to my own daughter, is this part where okay, I'm going to do this. And you say to your husband, Lord, I'm just going to eat these whole foods and no sugar, no flour, none of the chocolate and desserts and bread and all your favorite comfort foods. Like you're like, okay, I'm just going to do this. And you did it. I love the part where you went to bed. You're like, I don't feel so good. And you go to bed, and 3 days later you woke up and you're like, damn, I feel good. It was like, it was turning point. It's like, you slept 3 days of detox off. I feel like you cheated.
I didn't sleep the whole 72 hours, but it's true, right? I said to my husband, I'm just going to go have a nap. And then, 3 days later, I'm like emerging, although I didn't sleep nonstop, but my body was like, I'm checking out. I can't deal with this. And then a bit like Snow White, the magic kiss from kicking sugar. And I did, during those 3 days, I was aware enough in order to go on the internet and look up what the heck was happening to me. And sort of, I realized, this is kind of detox or whatever it is you want to call it. And I just sort of, it occurred to me that it was normal. It reassured me that it was normal. Not everyone has it, but I did. And, and then, I sort of jumped up after 3 days and felt a whole lot better.
And then you kind of never looked back, right?
I never looked back, really. I mean, I look back intellectually to look back at how I'd been eating and just how much sugar and flour was actually in my diet before. But I didn't want to go through all that again. And as you say, I didn't have that bad of a time of it compared to other people. But it was bad enough for me not to want to go back and sort of start from scratch each time. And also I'd made it public on my Facebook profile, not that I'm super famous or anything, on the contrary, but I'd made it public that I was doing this. And then my ego got in the way of me looking back, to be honest.
Right. And I also think it's a clear classic indication that you're not high on the addiction spectrum, that you can have this transformational experience of, oh my goodness, I really do feel better off these foods. And you were curious enough and maybe public enough that you just kept moving forward, and the benefits just got better and better. And a deep awareness that it was the sugar and the flour that were making you sick all these decades, whereas an addict will absolutely have the same experience. Oh man, I feel better. Although their detox may be longer and more difficult, maybe. But then what happens is we still slip and relapse. We keep going back.
Yeah.
We keep thinking, what is wrong with me? Like, I know this stuff is hurting me, but you didn't. And
no, I didn't do that. And when I first sort of discovered this whole world of sugar addiction, I felt, and still do, like a fraud, because I don't share those behavioral patterns. And I didn't fall off the wagon or whatever. I didn't struggle. It wasn't always easy, but I didn't struggle to the point that sugar addicts struggle.
And I think it's so important that you are able to speak to and support people who are not on the addiction spectrum or are really high on the addiction spectrum, because those individuals need a different intervention. The abstinence is so much more clean and perfect. Whereas for your path forward, you just kind of said, I don't really want to go back. And, and so what happened when you did, let's say, have a slip, or you were out eating out or something, and there was a bit of sugar or flour in it or something? How did you handle that?
The sugar was actually easier than the flour, because you can taste the sweetness of sugar. So I could tell straight away first of all, I refused desserts, or, kindly refused. And that was more difficult socially than it was nutritionally, as it were, because the less sweetness I was tasting over time, the less sweetness tasted good, if that makes any sense. It just started to taste actually bad, which I would never have thought possible. And then, but the sort of social reactions of me, a former sweet tooth, the dessert queen, the chocolate, lover saying no thank you. That was more difficult to navigate the social reactions than my own physical sort of reactions, as it were. And then the flour was, for the longest time, I just didn't eat bread, or I would sort of find alternatives that in the end I just didn't bother with them because they were all flops. All my attempts at trying to use other types of flour were all flops. My family was like, can you please stop trying to
You're killing us.
You're killing us, just if you're going, and it was basically, if you're going to make pancakes, just use regular wheat flour and stop with the coconut flour and the almond flour, just stop with it. So that they were actually quite instrumental in making me just calm down. And it was like, you either eat the flour, the regular wheat flour, or you don't. And that's the end of that. And that in a way was freeing for me, because I wasn't looking around for alternatives. Same with sweeteners. I never ate those anyway. So it actually took like 5 years of no bread at all, or very, very little. And then COVID hit, and then I actually asked my husband, can you make sourdough bread? Because I'm interested in the fermentation process. That was my excuse. And then it smelled so good in the house. And then I had to have a bit. And then I was like sneaking bits of bread and loading them with butter and saying, well, it's a good support for my butter, this bread. But really, I could see that this behavior was sneaking back in. The sneaky behavior was sneaking back in. Not that it was a big thing in the past, but I'd been free of it for so long that having it back in my life made me realize I don't want to be sneaky. I just don't want to be that kind of, I don't want to have that behavior. It's not who I am, it's what I'm doing. And so that made me more aware of it, because it had been absent from my behavior for so long. Then I just stopped it. And I know it sounds easier said than done. I just stopped it. But that also, I think, is because I'm not high on the addiction scale, that I was able to take a step back and say, I don't want to behave like this. Therefore, I will stop behaving like this.
Incredible. And what sort of benefits did you see in your body, in your mind, and in your life, like as you pulled out these refined carbohydrates?
Yes, well, one of the first things was having more energy. And, I don't mean energy like I'm running a marathon or, scaling Mount Everest. Just energy to live my life without feeling exhausted at any time. And that in itself, when you're in your 40s, now I'm in my 50s, that there's a lot to be said for having the energy of a 20-year-old just to live your life. And also the sort of the mental clarity and the mental energy of feeling enthusiastic about the day. So not dragging yourself through the day, there was that. I had about 15 extra pounds that I was sort of, not determined to lose, but I would have liked to have lost them, and they melted away without me doing any extra exercise. Now I know that exercise does nothing for weight loss anyway. But I didn't know that at the time. And I was amazed. Where did my thighs go? Like my saddlebags, where did they go? Where did my little muffin top go? It melted away. Now I know why, of course. And my joints, I always had like backaches and like achy joints. And now my movements are supple. So it was all of these together. I used to have like athlete's foot that went away on its own, all these little pains and, aches and pains just stopped. It was amazing.
You had mentioned, and if this is a place you don't want to go, that's totally cool. You'd mentioned about mental health issues, and what has lingered? Is there still some stuff that lingers, or is it still in the process of healing?
Yes, it is. Yes, it's. When I was in my late 20s, I actually, had a depression that was medicated, and I had to see a psychiatrist, not even a psychologist. It was all according to the DSM-5, I was a bona fide depressed person. And it's in my family as well. So, and I really, I could not get up and function at that time. So that whole experience taught me to recognize the signs of being on the edge and to pull myself back, or get help to pull myself back when I was on the edge of slipping down into this deep, dark hole. And so I'm not glad it happened, but I'm glad I had the learning experience from that for the rest of my life. And I had ups and downs in my 30s, including infertility, which is really difficult. It was very difficult for me mentally. I felt like a failure, and I felt like, I just felt hopeless. I kept failing at it, and many other things. And now sugar-free and flour-free does not mean I'm dancing with unicorns every day. Certainly doesn't. But I have been able to take away the screen that sugar and chocolate and bread always were the sort of go-tos whenever I started feeling any type of emotion, usually negative, but not exclusively. And now I've been learning over the last 7 years to actually not just feel the emotions, but process them and calm them and soothe them to the extent that I can feel some sort of, I hesitate to use the word control, because that sort of has the connotation that I'm trying to deny them. I'm not trying to deny them. I'm just trying to live with them instead of trying to negate them or soothe them away with something that in the long run is going to make me feel even worse, i.e. sugar and flour and chocolate and whatnot. So it's like that my feelings and emotions are more in my face now, because they're not being hidden or smothered with chocolate, as I say. But I'm also stronger and more able to deal with them. So they're not less there. I've just got more tools to deal with them now.
Amazing. And so I wouldn't call any of that mental illness, but since going sugar flour free in the last 7 years, have you actually had like a depression episode other than the early days?
No.
Okay.
No.
Right.
No, I haven't.
Yeah.
And I didn't since my late 20s either. But that, I think being able to learn to cope with your emotions goes a long way to preventing, for me at least, slipping back into depression.
Right. Got it. Yes. Because so many of us have that story that we were suicidally depressed on and off 20s and 30s, right? Sometimes earlier. And that when we do clean up our diet and get back on whole foods, we realize that our mental health is very, very, very tied to our brain health. And that if we can get onto whole foods, our depression lifts. But you're right, we're left with no buffer between us and feelings. Right. And that it's quite a journey, and it takes quite a number of years, doesn't it, for us to learn how to be with our feelings and to figure out what tools do I need to use at the right time to move through this life experience? Because life's still life on the other side of sugar free. Exactly.
I always say that, real life still happens whether or not you eat sugar, and not eating sugar helped me at least to actually deal with what was going on instead of trying to run away from it all the time.
Yes. What tools do you use to help you navigate the more emotional rawness and vulnerability that we experience on the other side of sugar?
Yeah, some of it is just naming it and getting it out of the closet, as it were, and expressing it verbally, writing it in groups. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling hopeless. I'm feeling this, like naming it, giving it the name that it actually deserves, and accepting that all feelings are valid. There aren't good or bad feelings in the same way as there aren't good or bad foods. It's how we relate to them. So it's sort of, I can't pretend that it's easy, the so-called, bad feelings or the difficult ones, but there they are. So it's like naming them. I'm feeling like this. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling down. And then it's funny, because the more you actually express it, the more other people feel permission to be able to say, well, so do I. And especially these days, there's lots of us. And then another one I found was that it's just breathing in, count to 5, breathing out, count to 5, just to slow down the whole parasympathetic system. And I've got some exercises that I'm learning to do also for the vagus nerve, that just calms the whole system down so that you're not denying the feelings, but you're also not getting yourself into a spin about those feelings and sort of making it even worse when it doesn't need to be.
Right. And we kind of discover that I often say the words to my head, and it comes from a friend of mine when I was just a new mom. Sky was probably under 3 months, and I wasn't sleeping right, and I was overwhelmed, and I was tired, and I just had no perspective. And he would say to me, "It's not so bad. It's not so bad." And I hear his words still in my head sometimes when I feel really emotionally raw and I'm moving through something. And I think it's not so bad. And you notice it's not so bad. I'm not a little baby anymore, completely dependent on my parents to do right by me, because the fear is that I'm going to be stranded. And it's not true. I'm an adult now. I can meet my needs. I have lots of resources and supports, and I'm okay. In the present moment, I'm actually okay. It's just because I've been triggered back to times in my life when my nervous system couldn't handle what was going on in my childhood. And I'm not there anymore. And it's such a great gift to be able to
do that. Definitely. And it's I'm a teacher, and I often say that it's a bit like learning a language, to learn all these new tools that, let's face it, no one really ever taught us. It really is like learning a language. It's like a huge mountain, or it seems like a huge mountain. You start learning a few elements. You don't know what's it's all about. You don't understand it, and you're not fluent in it until you've had lots of practice, And the other thing that helped me is also because I was lucky enough to have gotten the recommendation to make my own fermented foods and drinks, probiotic foods and drinks. And that connection, the brain-gut connection, when you've got good gut health, and I make my own kombucha, my own yogurt, my own sauerkraut and whatnot, that helped, I think, make my gut health healthy enough for the signals. Your serotonin is made in your gut, and for the signals to be able to travel up to my brain. And that also helped a lot in just calming everything down.
Beautiful. So tell us a little bit about how you work with people, and some of the successes you've seen.
Yes. Well, my podcast, Life After Sugar, and it's after sugar, not without, because some people find that they fare perfectly well with a bit of sugar or forms of sugar or whatever. It's I think what is so touching or relatable and popular about this podcast of mine is that it's a whole different range of stories of regular people, ordinary people whose lives have been completely transformed from cutting down or cutting out sugar, depending. And I like to show that there is a sliding scale of living sugar-free. And the operative word here is free and not sugar. It's the freedom. And if you find your freedom with a little bit of fruit or dried fruit or honey or whatever, so be it, go for it. And I've got people on my podcast who are 100% vegan, all the way to 100% carnivore and everything in between, all the way abstinent as real sugar addicts, low bottom sugar addicts, all the way to, I cut, sodas, and that was okay, whatever. And I've got people who do intermittent fasting and people who need to weigh and measure their food and eat 3 times a day. All of it is valid. So I think the podcast, from the sort of the reviews and the comments I get, it's giving people permission to find their own freedom on their own terms, in their own way, with guidance from me and from my guests.
Amazing. Is there anything else you would like to add on the topic of life after sugar?
Sure. Well, I do have a membership called the After Sugar Club. So anyone is welcome to join at any time. It's always open. And we have, I give weekly Zoom calls. I call them support calls, but, it's mostly actually people just needing that kind of touch point in their path to a sugar-free life. Some of them need like input from me about their fermented foods and drinks, and others about, whole foods, and how do I cope with the birthday party, and how do I actually live day to day sugar-free? How do I deal with social pressure and all these things that once you are sort of consuming less sugar and less processed foods, then the next thing that comes along is, how do I make this into a day in, day out lifestyle? So that's really what the membership is all about. And I also have, Facebook page, Life After Sugar, and an Instagram account at My Life After Sugar. So I'm out there, and I have a YouTube channel as well, Life After Sugar. It's really, I think, to accommodate people who, as you say, are not 100% sugar addicts, but they're somewhere below that, but also they recognize that sugar is not doing them any good and they need to cut down.
Mm-hmm. What would you say to somebody, is my final question for you to wrap up this wonderful interview. What would you say to somebody who's listening to just exactly where you were before you did that 3-day experiment, or you launched and you went to bed for 3 days practically. And they're like, oh, I couldn't do that. Like, I just can't imagine living life without my sweets and my chocolates, etc. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I couldn't imagine it either. Totally. Yes. And it's funny because doing what seems impossible is such a huge mountain. And I resisted it, for the longest time. And then it's like, what have you got to lose? Give it a try. Give it a try for a week. I suggest 2 weeks, because the first week's often the detox week. If you give up then you'll never get there. But give it a try. What have you got to lose? You can always go back. And so nothing's forever. Take it one day at a time. And I think what saves many, many people, including myself, is keeping an open mind, being adventurous, not seeing it as all or nothing, forever, never again. That sort of thinking is self-sabotage in my experience, and will stop you from making any type of step forward.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much for this interview and your time today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for tuning in this week. If you would like more interviews, more information, and more inspiration on how to break up with sugar, go to my YouTube channel, Kick Sugar Coach, or my website, kicksugarcoach.com. See you next week.